Hello and welcome to the Crypto Insider interview. I am Vlad and today my guest is Chris DeRose, who is very well known for debating and being a contrarian. And sometimes he likes to pretend that he's stupid and he doesn't know stuff, even though he has that approach that we have read in the works of Plato when he was describing Socrates. So hello, Mr. DeRose.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for having me on the show. I like that introduction.
Oh yeah, I know because I have been following you on Twitter and I saw your style. You like to belittle yourself and pretend that you have no idea what's going on just to get more information from people. And then you slam them with that argument that they were not expecting. So that's an interesting approach.
Well, I don't know what the humble way is to like tell somebody that maybe their arrogance needs to be checked. But that's the best I've found. So I'm open to better suggestions, but seemingly that is the best of things. Seemingly.
While we were discussing before, you told me that you want to approach the topic of cryptocurrency journalism and you have some opinions to express on this topic. And I guess that affects me and my colleagues in direct ways. And this is your chance to take shots if that's what you want.
Well, it's not a matter. I mean, it's not even a matter of like taking shots. I mean, I try to not evaluate things in an allegiance sense as much as possible, which is hard to do, especially in this space. And maybe that's a good way to introduce the topic of journalism, is from this aspect of the allegiance of the journalist and how that maybe affects a lot of the reporting and what it is to even be a journalist, maybe in the modern era.
So, what is your opinion on the state of crypto journalism? I know that we have websites like, I guess CoinDesk is the biggest one, and then there is the Cointelegraph and the Bitcoin Magazine. And I'm not sure where Crypto Insider is in this equation. We don't have the budget that they have, and we don't have the exclusive interviews, and we don't get to talk to big bankers and get opinions from them whenever we publish a piece. But we try to remain as objective as we can and have a diverse team which approaches many topics. As in, we actually have somebody who talks about permission blockchains and how universities like Columbia use permission blockchains for various projects, and sometimes corporations use them. And we have some debates on Slack, and I say, that's not really a good idea. They could just use databases. And he tells me, oh, you have been brainwashed by your Bitcoin maximalist friends, and it's so much more than you think. And this technology has the kind of potential that you cannot even conceive. But I told you this bit of information just to let you know that we are, in this sense, decentralized, as in there is no official vision. We are just trying to do our best jobs at what we know and what we like. And the beauty of it is that we pursue our passions in a very small niche that we cover.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I would preface anything we say about journalism with the understanding that everybody involved at every end of this process is trying to do the right thing, including the people who maybe have failed in a journalistic capacity or who are even acting in bad faith, I would say. And so I wouldn't be like quick to label blame on anybody in the space, really, because I see how it works. I've been around the space long enough to understand the pressures people face. You can kind of really, the bigger issue, I think, is like the social media algorithms and the search engine algorithms. And so you can probably start with that. So first and foremost, the type of stuff that gets attention is itself a bit perverse. It's hard to really say anything that isn't in some way appealing to a very base need in humans. So that starts with something like clickbait, where you present a problem or an outrage that needs a resolution, or you shock the reader, or you provide some level of some frictional level of presentation. And then it kind of goes from there. So then, okay, you've hooked a reader now based on some level of probably, it's not, I wouldn't say like an intent to mislead, but it's at least at some level a misrepresentation perhaps of the news, because you're pandering to a subset of the news, or you are even construing mainstream issues with some level of primal desire that may not really be there other than to capture attention. And then from there, you have advertiser interests. And those really pervert the process even further because now, in order to even produce news, you have to make your advertisers happy. And so that there's a whole load of things you can't say or do because your paycheck depends on making those people happy with your output so that they will continue to fund your site. So unless your readers are paying, that you have that concern. Even and then even if your readers are paying, that often becomes its own set of issues, maybe. But that's a lesser set, I would say. And then from there, you have reporter biases. A lot of the reporters in the space are underpaid or not paid well at all, or even at all, really. And so the question is, what is their intent? And in many cases, it is very noble. They just want to perfect the craft, and they're just trying to do the right thing. But even still, you have to ask yourself, what kind of person maybe is being attracted to this industry. If the pay is inferior maybe to other industries, you don't necessarily get people who I would suggest are always above, up on the up and up. There are many who are. There's some great journalists in the space. There really are. But you get a lot of these people who are going to just pump whatever shitcoin of the day is. You can see that all the time. These agenda pieces and like the incentive that they have for writing has less to do with informing the public as an act of generosity, more to do with steering an outcome that enriches them because the financial component isn't provided to them by the industry. And then on top of all of that, I think you have increasing competition from algorithmic writing. So the amount of content that we're starting to see, it's just growing like exponentially. And so you have these pieces that I think like Reuters has been doing this already for a good while, but they're these weirdly synthesized computer-written pieces that are, I don't know, it has a strange effect on me as a reader. You almost kind of like, you're just reading for spending time. I feel like there isn't a lot of style maybe. But I think that even pollutes the process as well, because those types of pieces are probably gaming the algorithms. It probably explains some of how they're written. And so yeah, you've got this like gigantic mess, honestly, that is journalism today. Oh, and then another piece that might throw in there is like the lack of time as a result of all of this. So like if you as a reporter want to like really generate some hard-hitting information, the amount of time that goes into that is non-trivial. So with all these other pressures, the cost to produce good content is just kind of like no longer there. So you end up with these quick pieces that feed the sensitivities of the general public or the neuroses of the general public more so than they educate the general public. And so, yeah, I do think there's some exemplary periodicals in this space. I really do. And even in the cases where there are like, these scoundrels, even then I'm very sympathetic to them, I think, because I see how hard the pressures are. But we can drill down into any of that if you'd like. What do you think?
Yeah, actually, this was a big debate that we had back in December when we realized that you don't really find sponsors. It's very difficult in this market to find honest actors who are willing to pay, because the businesses that thrive during the bear markets are the honest ones and the ones that everybody knows. So they don't really need any kind of advertisement. You can have that banner for Ledger maybe, which gives you like a small percentage of every purchase that is made through your referral link, but that's something that doesn't really happen. And when you get to that point, you realize that your two options are to either charge for the articles and become a publication which is payment only and you have subscribers, or you accept money from shitcoiners and scam artists and people who are not necessarily convergent with the kind of content that you produce, but you have to survive somehow. Or you can also install a Monero miner on the website, but that's not really useful unless you have thousands of hits. And it's a vicious cycle, which I guess is not very easy to solve.
Well, underscoring all of that too, I'd say is like, what is an honest business in this space? Can you name like 5 honest businesses?
Well, I think Casa is honest. I
Okay,
like
that's a good
what they're
one.
doing. I think Ledger and Trezor are honest in
Okay.
their stuff. And let me think. Okay, that you said 5. I would have said just 3 and
Well,
stop.
that's fine. It doesn't. Okay, so of the 3 you produced, they aren't recurring revenue models, so they are generally a one-time purchase, and that's that. It's not the money continues to come in the door. Like, those problems are endemic in the space, and so what that means is that the relationship with the customer is not terribly meaningful or worth investing in, even because it's a one and done relationship. So those companies should be commended. They do fine things, but that also perverts the process, because you're not really setting up for a recurring model as a journalist. You're setting up for these, get people in the door, and then whatever happens, it doesn't matter. They got there. That's okay. So like that, in my mind, that promotes more incentives to produce clickbait pieces than well-considered pieces where you develop a relationship with the audience.
Yeah, sure. And sometimes you see it in the headlines. And I remember I used to work at Crypto Globe, and every time somebody was posting a new article, we had a debate about the best title, which had to be as short as possible and amass the most information as possible, but at the same time be clickbaity in the sense that it made you curious about what's going on. And
One simple
sometimes,
trick.
yeah, one simple trick, and these 7 methods will get you rich in the next bull market, or 5 altcoins to consider in your portfolio and stuff like that. But it's terrible because you're trying to create this kind of content which makes you think and is food for thought generally, but then you promote it with these schemes which are cheap and are the lowest denominator of anything which has to do with journalism. But unfortunately, when people look on maybe news aggregators for something exciting or something to get their attention, they actually click on these which look the most sensational and most
Mhm.
breaking. That's
But,
terrible.
yeah, and this isn't entirely a crypto problem either. Like, this is endemic to the state of journalism as a whole. There are some exceptions, but there's not many exceptions.
Yeah, sometimes, you know what intrigues me generally? The idea that we have CoinDesk and the Cointelegraph, which run ads and they do advertorials and have they have a very good business model, but at the same time, they don't need that. They are financed by big, gigantic, actually, companies like DCG, and they have other ventures which belong to their trusts. So it blows my mind, the idea that actually these publications, which might as well be informative and benevolent, turn into something which uses the same tactics as smaller websites like CCN or something, which actually isn't backed by a gigantic company. They don't have a business model which allows them to write freely and approach any topic that they want and do investigative journalism and stuff like that. But it's terrible when you see that they can afford to have very qualitative journalism, but they don't.
The
Not
audience doesn't want it. I got news for you. If every time I've seen like a really great piece go out there that I thought was great, well considered, presented information in a way that was fair and balanced, in the way that I think that a journalist should, usually the audience abhors it, which, it gets into a deeper conversation about what the nature of the business is as an informer, because in many cases the need that readers have is to feel confidence and affirmation. So if that is the reason they're coming to you, is because they have some level of like perceptive risk in their investment strategy, or looking at their numbers, they're feeling a loss of connectedness to their investment thesis. When they come to read, they don't want fair and balanced. They want affirmation. They want to be cheer-led into feeling like they're doing the right thing. So it seems to me that that's a huge part of a lot of the pieces as well, for whatever that's worth. And I can, there's probably examples of that we can get into.
Yeah, when you put it like that, there's actually a lot of pressure that you put on people who write. Because I haven't taught before. Really, I don't consider it that people read what I write and then take it as financial advice for their portfolios or some kind of reassurance. that they have made the right decision when they picked those coins. So I have no idea. I don't think about it. I try just to do a good job and then see what happens next. But I noticed at some points with CoinDesk and the Cointelegraph that they made during the bull run of 2017, that they made the writers disclose what coins they owned so that it didn't look like they were just pumping their own bags, which is also an interesting perspective.
I think CoinDesk has done a good job, if not a great job, in the business, and they've done some things that I could see offending people, but they've also led a lot of initiatives, like you just said, to rectify those same ends that they cause. So a lot of this is just new to people. They don't really know what they're doing, and we learn from our mistakes, I guess. But like, even like, I don't know, consider, like, would you write a piece that would be like the 5 biggest problems facing Bitcoin, or the 5 biggest concerns Bitcoiners have, or something? I get that that's like clickbaity, but like, would you write a piece like that? Have you written a piece like that?
I did write pieces to criticize sometimes,
Well, but that's the thing.
not
It's
to
not
the extent.
necessarily criticism. I get that in this space it would be labeled that, but I would say that, like, if you're only promoting pieces that affirm that, you're probably not doing journalism well. Like, you would generally have the I mean, in the old days, you would have some presentation of the counterpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that on one hand you have the news, which are maybe much more objective. You can interpret some dimensions. You can comment on the history of that event, or what has happened before it, or what you believe that will happen next. But that's the speculation part. You have the reporting part, which is the most honest, I guess, because you take it from the more or less reliable source and then reword it in a way that makes sense and maybe easier to digest by your readers. And then you have the op-eds and all the pieces which are by default subjective. And that's when I write op-eds, it's usually in a pros and cons structure. I try my best, even though
Yeah.
it's good news, I try my best to present something negative.
That's good. You should. As a journalist, I think you have to. I've been told, and I remember reading and thinking, you have to go out of your way to get both sides of the story and communicate that, and try theoretically to put your own personal goals aside. But that rarely happens here. And if you, I don't know, but you tell me. Like, if you put a piece out that isn't affirmational, do readers blacklist you as an author, if you found that to be the case? Or have you never done that before?
I don't really know. I don't
Right. Yeah.
engage much with the audience. I don't do social media too much. I just post on my Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Even in that case, I don't get much reactions, many reactions. Usually, I don't have more than 1,000 views on average, but I get like 5,000 when it's something big.
Yeah. So, like, watch then, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe things will change. That'd be ideal. But what I've seen is, if you don't like repeat the party lines, you don't repeat the herd messages, you often are declared an enemy of Bitcoin, and then you'll have a troop that will dedicate their online lives to like telling people how horrible you are, so that your positions aren't read. And I think it's kind of funny, frankly, but that's like a disincentive, I think, that a lot of the writers have been met with in their time in this space, that is very unique to this space, and kind of maligned, I think, with the public good.
Oh yeah, I remember last year when I had my Twitter account suspended after it got reported by the Bitcoin Cash community. I
Yeah,
guess I wrote
there you
something
go.
critical
Exactly.
about Roger Veer, and
There you go.
they reported my account.
Yep.
It was blocked, I guess, for a couple of weeks, and then for a month I could not follow anyone. So my feed consisted only of my own tweets, which I guess is called shadow banning or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I know those. I know those feels, man. It's really, really disheartening sometimes, and you just got to take it in stride. You know, I think that the role of the journalist is like deplorable these days. Honestly, like not in the sense that I believe that it's deplorable, but I think that the general public does. You see this, I think, all over the place, even outside of our industry, where if somebody says like what really is kind of fair and balanced, just reporting, like not even like an op-ed maybe, uh, it becomes like the endemic to the institution now that they promote misinformation, which isn't maybe what it is at all, but it becomes like these games of allegiance, you know, and CNN being fake news most famously. I don't know. I have problems. I don't know. You're not American. I have problems with CNN maybe. So like I'm less like sensitive to that particular campaign, but it's still like a bit perverse that you would blacklist the whole institution over the work of one or two journalists. But like that's kind of a special case too, I will say, you know, being in the crosshairs of the president maybe, which fortunately we don't have those levels of resistance here, at least not yet.
It's actually a global phenomenon, believe it or
Yeah.
not.
Is
But
it, you have those
journalists,
problems in Romania?
yeah, but in our case, it's very clear. So you know which television belongs to which party and from where they get their funding and which politicians they invite. And I guess we only have a couple of channels which try to be objective, but it's hard even for them to hide their bias. But let's get back to crypto because I guess that's our main topic. And
Well, crypto is like a microcosm of the rest of the world for whatever it's worth. Almost every time there's an issue in the macro space, it does work its way into a very Bitcoin-esque version. I will say that's actually, I find that very affirming personally, because then it's like, oh, okay, so this is like you said, this journalism is an issue, isn't our problem per se, it's a world problem, which is nice. That means it's not like we're doing something wrong necessarily.
no, I guess we are the reflection of our society or something that Auguste Comte may or may not have said at some point. I didn't get my degree in sociology, but also it's interesting when you see very smart people in this space who have written intensive works and I truly admire. And they post stuff like, you know, journalists should learn to code. And that's what the purpose of everybody should be because it's
Yeah.
very productive and lucrative and, you know, learn to code. That's the solution to your problems. Quit reporting, learn to code.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about that whole thing even for as much time as you've got, but suffice to say, I do know how to code better than most people. Maybe not as good as the coders in Bitcoin, but I don't think coding actually helps you write better pieces, journalistic pieces. So
I don't think that's the point of it.
yeah,
So
frankly,
they're
I think
not
it probably
saying
makes it
you
worse.
have to acquire a logical way of thinking by pursuing coding, which is more or less objective as you deal with a compiler which has to validate that you have written good code. No, they're not.
Yeah, humans aren't like logical. Like that's if you think that a human's going to be like a rational actor at any given point, you're gonna have a bad time. So yeah, journalists have to deal with people who do crazy fucking things that make absolutely no sense whatsoever. But they're doing it, so it's up to you to figure out why they think they're doing it. And yeah, coding has like no bearing on that understanding.
I was telling you about it. Some of us covered whatever John McAfee did, and I try to avoid it. I think he's a bad influence and a bad representative for our community, even though he's very active and very well known outside it, which gives him a lot of influence.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I've not been a fan of McAfee's either, but I will say, like, you might have suffered as a periodical by not covering him, because if he's trending, like that's going to bring eyeballs in. And if you got to, you know, like you don't have a relationship with the readers the way you used to, or I shouldn't say you, general you, at any given publication. It used to be that you had a relationship with your town newspaper, or you had a relationship with the New York Times or some such thing. And now online, you have a relationship with Google maybe, but Google then spits you off to one of the many providers of news to which you really don't give a crap. So like if they want information about McAfee, they're going to find it. And it's unfortunate because there may not be anything good to say about McAfee, but meanwhile, the person who does that, who says something good about McAfee or provides any information, is going to get that person's attention for the hour, or 10 minutes, whatever it is.
I think what makes you a great journalist in general, and I don't want this to be some kind of self-flattery or something, but ethically, it's great when you get to choose what not to cover, because what you choose to ignore is just as important as what you choose to cover. Sometimes
That's very true.
you don't
I agree with
highlight
that.
to the public something that may be unworthy of being mentioned, and you don't want to get into the lower type of reporting and get to the lowest type of denominator and become a full-fledged tabloid or do the kind of BuzzFeed articles with top 10s and stuff like that. So you try to stay away from that. But
I get that, but then you got to ask yourself too, like what do you get out of it? See, like what's perverse about that attitude to me, while I agree with everything you just said, is that you end up in this sort of ivory tower where you end up being very, very well written and read, but ultimately unable to provide a service to the public because you may only be targeting the people who are already reasonable. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's like the trade-off, I think, unfortunately.
I like to think that people learn and try to educate themselves on a daily basis. Otherwise, why bother to read anything? They could just look at, I don't care. I don't know. What do people care about in this space? Price action and predictions and stuff like that. I try to stay away as much as I can from it and report on maybe the events that trigger the price action, like something announced about the technology or stuff like that. I announced like the Mimblewimble implementation in Litecoin, which I think is interesting. It's the first time when a fork of Bitcoin does this, and it's going to be implemented by Bitcoin by a soft fork if it succeeds, and it's going to be optional. And that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it is. I agree. It's been my experience that like independent of the greed-based, maybe it is only greed in some cases, but independent of the greed, the price talk type pieces, generally people are looking for something to do with justice, which is really funny to me because it's a very conservative crowd around here. But you very quickly find people clamoring to cry out whatever injustice has happened. And oftentimes, like the cryptocurrency, people get lumped into that. So, like maybe in the case of Bitcoin, anytime there's an issue with the banks, or obviously the libertarian tropes of taxation and such, these injustices are oftentimes what bring people together in the community and what drive a lot of the attention in the community. So there isn't a lot of injustice when you write about to be discussed when you write about these technical pieces, and that's fine if you're targeting the demographic that cares about the technical side of things. But it's been my experience that there's very few people who care about the tech in this space. Your experience may differ. Bitcoin maximalism has been a very interesting journey because I think that I get a lot of credit for having at least started much of that. Maybe not, I don't really care. But when Bitcoin maximalism started, it was the neologism, I think is how you pronounce it, newly created word, was created by Vitalik. And he was describing myself and John Seth. And he provided a very fixed definition. And like what always happens in this space, I think it's just dialectics, I'm not positive about that, but is that a word becomes charged and then it quickly loses its meaning. We saw that with blockchain. When blockchain used to mean a thing that was very concrete, and then over time, it became meaningless. And I think that process has started with maximalism. Because if I tell you what the original definition is of maximalism, you probably would believe that there are no maximalists. And I think that's true. So it seems like a community rallied around this word. And now that the actual meaning is no longer tenable, the community will change the meaning so that their herd can remain contiguous. But for me, I find it very disingenuous because if the word no longer has meaning, then it's you can still have your herd, but you kind of have to drop the arrogance or the righteousness. You were wrong. Now, of course, no herd's ever going to accept that they were wrong about anything. I've come to understand this. And so we end up in this like funny spot now where you have these very like inconsistent beliefs. And if you bring them up, you get blocked usually because the entry of new information is not able to preserve the harmony in the group. So here, I try the Vitalik Buterin, let's see, Bitcoin maximalism. I look up
I remember the article. It was from 2013 or something, or 14. And it was a derogatory term. It was a way of calling Bitcoiners basically closed-minded.
Well, it's more than that. It was fairly specific. I'm looking at it now, and I'll just take a couple quick words out. Bitcoin maximalism is both maximalists, are both righteous and believe with inevitability that the Bitcoin currency comes to take a monopoly position in the cryptocurrency scene. There's a few other parts to it. Building something on Bitcoin is the only correct way to do things, and that doing anything else is unethical. And maximalists often use the network effects as an argument and claim that it is futile to fight against them. Okay, so that's roughly how it was defined. But you can ask yourself, like, how many maximalists believe that now? And there's very, very few. Almost all of them hold secretly some collection of non-Bitcoin tokens. I must use the T word. And like also like I don't think there's any cogent case for Bitcoin maximalism either. And like they know that because like if you try to discuss it with them and you bring up any like salient point, you get blocked, which is why I'm blocked by all the I call them the priests of maximalism, because I do see it turning into like a faith-based movement now. But like you have this notion of like the purity and filth. It's fairly primitive. It's certainly tribal, and the sort of master race blockchain is Bitcoin, I guess, and that anything else is the subhuman. It seems to be what is the politically correct discourse in that community. But it falls on its face in a number of like very obvious ways, I would say, like not least of which is the empiricism, with the observations that a person can have, such that dominance is waning, and that frankly, and if you just look at like the new people that arrive, like there's no network effect happening. All of the conferences and such have almost completely dropped any form of Bitcoin promotion in lieu of other tokens. And I don't say this as a point of like pride. Frankly, it saddens me. But it's sort of, you can't really argue with it. This is what is seen. And the form of allegiance that I think was demanded is now changing into this subhuman like argument. So like they didn't do what we thought they would, so they are less than human. And we can talk about maybe some of that, but I'll leave that as is, and we can move on to like what some of the funnier inconsistencies are. So like Monero is okay, and the reason it's okay is like very funny because like Monero agrees that it is the subhuman, as best I can tell. I don't think you'll find too many people in the Monero community that would tell you that it is the master race. And that's okay. It's just that the level of like sophistication of the discussion is kind of absurd, because even if it is true that you are the subhuman, nonetheless, you're finding yourself in a world where the network effect has not been applied. So it immediately negates the original thesis of the tribe's goal of this sort of maximalist ethic. And then of course Grin brings this to like a really poignant sort of like impasse, because now you have the leaders of the Bitcoin movement who are themselves dropping maximalism, and you see this I think with Blockstream, you see this with core devs. The core devs have dropped maximalism a long time ago, I think, and so now you have this group that has become like this very intolerant group, I would say, and that's kind of compounding things from there. It's kind of encouraging people to believe in this like master race submission thing because of really the social media algorithms, I guess, and strange community pressures, much of which probably arises from people not actually needing the currency, because I think that there was a time when the need for the cryptocurrency was more prominent in the community, and those are bygone days. So you now have this sort of passion that is left unfocused, that is kind of become what we see today, I guess, where it was once more geared towards solution-driven approaches. It is now driven towards like faith-based approaches, which is kind of interesting, I think.
I don't necessarily agree with everything that you've said, mostly in
Sure.
regards to the faith-driven approach, as we still have solutions and we still have debates in the community, and we have the Lightning Network, which right now is growing at an unexpected scale. People buy nodes or they build their own with Puro shards code, and that's impressive. But in regards to maximalism, I remember I've had one of the first interviews ever with Giacomo Zucco, who is a
Oh
lot
yeah,
nicer
great.
than he looks. He trolls a lot online, and he seems harder to approach at first, but when you talk to him, you DM him, he's very responsive, very nice. And I spoke to him just a week after he spoke at the Honey Badger conference in, was it Estonia? I think, yeah. It was when he launched the B initiative, which he didn't want to be called a foundation, but it ended up being called a foundation.
But that's an example of faith, by the way. Like
And
I would suggest is that there was this faith that was, in my mind, incongruent with the foundation, and he knew it. That's what I see there.
yeah, but at the same conference, he made a presentation where he redefined maximalism for the new generation.
Yeah, of course, because
It
that's his community.
basically didn't mean what Vitalik said a few years ago. It was all about everything that is not Bitcoin is a scam. Every project which pretends to use the blockchain and is not Bitcoin is a scam and stuff like that. It was a very negative way of
That's
presenting it.
that's pretty consistent with Vitalik's definition, I'd say, because Vitalik made the point that it would be unethical to believe in anything but Bitcoin, per the maximalist trope, which it sounds like that's what I mean. I saw the presentation. That was my impression. That Giacomo's point was that it is unethical to hold, believe in, or participate in anything but Bitcoin. I think that's how I perceived it.
Yeah, I guess he made it look cooler and easier to comprehend, as Vitalik's article is long and difficult to digest. It takes some time to understand the subtleties, and he even has some technical parts in which he explains more details. Whereas in the case of Giacomo, it was just straightforward, and anyone can take that slide and look at it and understand what it's all about. But I
Yeah,
also understand why this is happening, and it makes a lot of sense in the middle of a bear market to increase maybe the optimism and explain to people that out of all these projects, and a lot of them are dead by now, even though they used to be big, and right now the ones that come to mind are Verge and Nem, which I remember
there's
was
so
in the
many.
top
Yeah.
10 at some point. And the only one of which we are certain that will still be here in 5, 10, 20 years is Bitcoin.
Why are we certain of that? Why couldn't it go tomorrow?
Because we have so many people who run nodes, and it's very difficult to take it down and convince people not to run their nodes, and they're going to do it out of passion just because they can use Tor and stuff like that. So it's so much more complex in terms of architecture, and I mean technical architecture. You have a lot of hardware which copies that blockchain and broadcasts it all around the world. So you even have a satellite, and there's a lot of investments and there's a lot of stuff going on. And the
I would suggest that
arbitrary,
the certainty is not there. I like Bitcoin. I would like it to be around for 5 years or 50 years or 5,000 years, but I don't know. Using words like certain, I think, is a bit maligned with the risk. If it was certain to last 5 years, we wouldn't have a price that I think is as low as it is. I would suggest the price would be like really high, frankly. And that's okay, I think. Well, one more point on the Giacomo thing. You should consider that, like, I think the way that faith manifests, as I've seen it, is that, well, first off, you generally find it manifesting in a group with like a low tolerance for disgust, meaning like the disgust. And now that I've pointed out, you'll probably see it even like in the form of like facial expressions, snarls and things are very common with the maximalists, but particularly Jimmy Song. But if you are yourself very much attracted to a disgust-based response, then you would find the simplification that Giacomo presented, because he rather he made it just that simple, and he made it just that simple by presenting disgust of any form of deviance. So it in my mind very much resembles like a faith-based assessment, and that's okay and good even, but it can the righteousness and the intolerance, I would say, and the indignation is where it often ends up working against us.
I think maximalism has had a good influence on the industry at large, as some scams have disappeared and they were called out at the right time. And then you have projects like Litecoin, which received a lot of blame, even though it's more honest than others. It didn't have a pre-mine. It was mined even by the creator at the right time so that he didn't have a lot of coins to sell or whatever. I like to believe that it wasn't him who crashed the price. It was his announcement that he has sold that crashed the price. But regardless of that, they are obsessed with the idea of immaculate conception.
Oh yeah, I know, I love it.
Ethereum is a scam because it had a pre-mine. And that's one of the ultimate arguments against any project like Zcash, which has minor rewards. And they like Grin for the simple reason that it's an immaculate conception. It's a protocol which is pure, which was run from day one by the enthusiasts. And even the developers were striving to find the kind of financing to keep them doing what they love and working for the project. And that's a sign that it's truly decentralized. But on the other hand, I can see why, financially speaking, Beam is more thriving and has a much more advanced wallet in terms of implementing Mimblewimble, and it's doing partnerships, and it has plans, and it has a monetary policy. So by comparing these two, which were launched roughly at the same time, you can see how far this more corporate Silicon Valley VC approach can get you when you take it. On the long run, I guess Grin is going to be around for a longer time as it doesn't have the same amount of points of failure, and anyone can pick it up.
Well, it's also more experimental though. Like I wouldn't, I mean, the market will assess the risk. I don't think the market assess the risk as being trivial, you know. There's a handful of problems with it. I think actually the immaculate conception preference is one of the probably the biggest adverse effects of maximalism, because in the maximalist faith, that which is old is better, or that which is unchanged is better. It leaves you very brittle and unable to respond to attacks, I would say. So like, you know, you see this even like with the core devs now who have concerns over the proof of work algorithm. So like it may be, like, for example, you feel that it is certain that in 5 years Bitcoin would last, but my concern would be, okay, well, maybe the mining algorithm wouldn't last, and then we have to break the immaculate form, which also is very hypocritical to begin with, because Bitcoin Core is a fork from that. The true Bitcoin, the immaculate Bitcoin, is the Bitcoin.Foundation, and nobody disagrees with that, which is so funny to me. But it at the same time makes the preachers effectively of Bitcoin maximalism look really stupid, I think, because they're preaching something that they're preaching the immaculate design of the decentralized world, and at the same time they're steering and they're allegiant to the Bitcoin Center, who has forked the immaculate design. So that, I think anybody who isn't of like deep into the faith, they're going to see that and say, "Oh, I guess I'll buy Ripple instead," and that's kind of what we've seen, frankly, I would say.
Yeah, I guess not many people have been around the space for as long as you have to remember this. And many of the maximalists are actually newer Bitcoiners who embraced this ideology. And I don't want to point fingers at them, because mostly I like them and I appreciate that they do something which Bitcoin has no capacity to do by itself. And it's up to the community to promote the ideas and highlight why this conservatism works on the long run, and why it has worked up to this point, and why it preserved the system, which through its reluctance to change.
Like, I mean, what metric are you using? Because if we look at dominance, I don't see that. And if we look at like merchant acceptance, I don't see that.
Yes, because in terms of dominance, I think that's a bad metric, just because you have had projects like Ethereum, which doesn't really compete with Bitcoin. They try to promote it as a good store of value, which may have properties of sound money at some point when they develop it, but it's much more centralized and it serves a different purpose. It's Turing complete and it's supposed to validate processing cycles. It's like what they call a world computer. They validate programs instead of just transactions. It's much more complex, and I don't believe it serves the same purpose as Bitcoin. And
What
if you
metric
look
would you
at,
use?
well, it's more centralized. It has an official narrative in this regard.
No.
You
What
have
metric would you use for comparing, I guess, the efficacy of maximalism, or even like the contiguousness of the philosophy? Like the philosophy would have, in the original expression, would have, I think, led me to believe that by now there would be fewer altcoins and fewer ICOs and fewer options and greater dominance. But we've seen the opposite.
Yes, because people like to make money. So when Bitcoin gets successful, you're going to have lots of scam artists who create a fork and say, this is going to be the next Bitcoin, and it's going to have the same success. But in a bear market, you see how the market levels and gets more realistic evaluation.
That's not what we're seeing anymore, though. That's the thing. It used to be that was the case, and it's not that way anymore, which is that's kind of interesting to me. Because it used to be that when the market went down, the dominance would go up, but lately that has decorrelated. So it's, again, you like this. I mean, maybe even harkens into some of our earlier discussions of like journalism. This is the kind of thing that's very hard for, I think, anybody to talk about, because it's inconsistent with like the reader's preconceived like risk models. But the thing is, it's good. It's like for me, like, it doesn't like it doesn't indict the space. It's just the notion of like anti-fragility is when you see a problem, you fix it. And there's like so many ways to fix it. But I think that because we promote the immaculate design, all of those fixing mechanisms are immoral. So now you have to you tie yourself to the ship and you hope it weathers through the storm. And maybe it will, and hopefully it will. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I see. It's not what I want. It's what I see.
I think that also dominance is a flawed metric, as it resorts to market cap, which is also a flawed metric. So if these two are tied, and
all metrics are flawed, no exceptions. Which metric would you prefer?
We could also define dominance as something which is tied to volume, which I guess is much more honest. Market cap is pretty faulty as a metric. But we have embraced it just because it's convenient, and we look at the price of one unit.
But you're now tasked to find something better. Like, all of our models are lossy and rough. So like the challenge isn't to find problems, but to find solutions in the metric. So I can probably give you more reasons why dominance is a bad indicator than most people can. But what I can't do is find a better metric. And maybe volume is it, but I don't know. I haven't spent any time looking into it. But,
I think volume indicates how much one project is being used on a daily basis, which is much more interesting than how much money is getting into that project. As you have projects like,
but then you're not a maximalist anymore. That's the thing. If you find these anything remotely compelling as a comparison, then it nullifies the value proposition, or at least the thesis, because the thesis was that none of these would have ever mattered ever, and here we are discussing how they matter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this is why I say there are no maximalists. They're just a group of people who want to stick together, and they should. But like, we need to find, like, the funny thing to me is that like people will believe whatever you tell them to believe, and so all we have to do is just tell them something better to believe. But because there's no coordination, the incentives are for people to not deviate, and then we have this like form of ultra conservatism now in this maximalist form, which we can talk about how Monero fits into that, because I find that actually very interesting. Maybe I don't know if that's interesting to you.
I spoke to Ricardo Spani a couple of times during interviews, and he's one of the nicest people around.
Yeah.
And even though I spoke to him twice and he explained to me stuff about ring signatures and other technologies that are underlying on Monero protocol, I still have no idea how it works. So in my mind, it's very blurry, and I don't understand how the blockchain of Monero works. And I try to read the white paper, but it's too technical for somebody like me who has no
Technicals don't matter,
technical
man.
expertise.
I'm telling you, 99.999% of the space, as best I can tell, does not have the ability to care about technicals and would know much about them, if they did. Like that, the faith part, the part that makes it valuable doesn't have anything to do with the technicals, it seems. It has mostly to do with the community, which is why I find Monero compelling. To be clear to anyone listening, Monero is a scam. You should not buy it. It is foul, it is rotten, and it is the subhuman, like me. That being said, the reasons I think it's interesting is because you have a group of people who were probably mostly the original Bitcoin maximalists, to be clear, who probably left. I can't speak for all of them. This is just what I've seen. They may disagree. Many of them, I think, decided that the sort of like piety maybe that Maximalism brought was antithetical to the goals of a academic process. And like you can see that like Monero will have no problems changing the hard fork, changing the work algorithm, because it's not a rock and it's not immoral to change its configuration. So I think a lot of the people who were original maximalists looked at Monero and said, oh, okay, not only is this a community that's a little bit more academic and pursues maybe like science more and math more, but then you also have a little more, in my estimation, a little more realness, I think, in terms of the value proposition. Like it is a software project, it's not a rock, and it is subject to change in response to the times. So I think that's like kind of where the main differences probably are between the Bitcoin maximalists and the Monero group, because the Monero guys are just as conservative and amenable to a lot of the same goals that you see in Bitcoin in terms of like freedom and economic, freedom and such. And in fact, like the only, I mean, for me, like I don't know what the difference really is between any of these blockchains, frankly, other than like the sort of community behind them. So like in the case of Monero, you have this privacy component that we can talk about if it's interesting, but like that is where all Bitcoiners know they want to be. You see, or at least all maximalists, I should say, not Bitcoiners. So all maximalists will tell you that they want to end up in a fungible store of value, which I would argue is really not what Bitcoin should do. But nonetheless, the maximalists believe that. So I think what will happen is a lot of those people will realize that the only reason that they wouldn't be in Monero is because they have faith in a flag or a nation or a group, but the solution that they're looking for already exists, and the community they're looking for probably already exists. So I find that dynamic interesting, and I would not be the least bit surprised to watch a lot of maximalists just jump ship over something at some point. Maybe there'll be a need for a hard fork, or maybe there'll be some drama. Who knows? But I could see that happening really easily.
I want to present a point in response to what you said, and it has much more to do with economics than it has to do with technical specifications. As Bitcoin's value proposition is that there will never be more than 21 million units, and that's something that they're trying to preserve against contentious actions and forks. So Monero has an infinite supply, and you know that it's going to be generated indefinitely as long as there is activity on the network and as long as you have miners. And I know that also Monero blocks ASICs through periodical hard forks, which is impressive, and I find that initiative to be noble in itself, as it incentivizes regular people to participate in the mining process, and it takes away that industrial dimension. But many of the maximalists are also involved more or less in mining operations. So they are also financially incentivized to defend this ASIC-based model, as they may hold like large plants in China or north of Canada and all these places where mining is quite an intensive and productive process.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin and Monero have to work together. Like, I don't see that. Like some people in the Monero community, and it's a very small minority, would say they'd want Monero to be number one, but I don't think that's even remotely possible. for a lot of reasons, mostly regulatory, frankly. But so yeah, I mean, I wouldn't make this like a Monero versus Bitcoin thing. I would say that Monero is probably a more maximalist, compliant faith. I would say probably at this point than Bitcoin is for a lot of like obvious reasons. Um, but there's a handful of things that maybe like I don't really believe the supply cap is fixed. I don't think that any Miesen or Austrian would. Unfortunately, it's probable that the supply cap wouldn't change, but like it depends how much time we're talking about. I think the books would tell you it would have to change because it's not actually a rock. So you can, and we've already like increased the block size and some others, like we know that humans control this. So like the Miesens and the Austrians would tell you that over time it would be certain that the humans would change the issuance, because that's what always happens in history. Is that necessarily true? No, but I mean, I will say that some of the steps I've seen happening are a bit discouraging, in the space. There's been a number of like fairly tyrannical things that have happened. The Mises, would have probably been shaking his finger at that kind of thing. But tell that to the preachers, I guess.
I guess when you differentiate between Bitcoin and Monero, the former is much more economic, as even cypherpunks like Tim May said that when he first read the white paper, which circulated on the cypherpunk mailing list, he thought it was just economic talk and nothing cypherpunk of substance. It didn't look like a very cypherpunk invention, like something which put privacy above everything else. And I think Monero is that. It's much more academic. It's based on lots of research in the field. It's dynamic in the sense that it changes just to preserve its value proposition of being private. And I think that's the major difference.
Yeah, I agree. One of the reasons I like the separation, frankly, is and I'm a very anti-fungibility in Bitcoin at this point. The regulatory risk model is different. So like Bitcoin, I believe, can be shut down at any time. It's really not that hard, if you ask me. And if we put fungibility in Bitcoin, it's more likely to be shut down. So I like having separate risk models because I don't mind at all if Monero is deemed illegal. I, in fact, wouldn't mind the regulatory certainty. I do hold Monero, and it would adversely affect my like finances, but at least like it would be nice for Bitcoin if that were to happen, because now we wouldn't have to pollute the risk in Bitcoin with fungibility. We would be like, okay, we know what's going to happen if we do that, and Bitcoin can be this sort of like primary gateway into the system of value, and then what happens to the value from there is not Bitcoin's fault. So that's kind of how I see that. And I think almost anybody would agree with that after very little reasoning, which again, it kind of obliterates the maximalist position, unfortunately. Or not, I don't know.
Yeah, well, if you regard, you just made yourself a subhuman by
I'm a
the
subhuman.
nature
I don't
of
mind.
argumentation.
I love the nature of what?
Your argumentation.
Well, but it's not, that's the thing, right? Like, I mean, if you were a journalist, you would present both sides in like a more traditional thing. So like who is presenting the con side of maximalism in a way that's competent? And I think a lot of the pressures in the space prevent anybody from doing that, because that affirmation of the investment is generally like the central need that people have for consuming content, which I find perverse, because like my allegiance, if you will, is no less aligned with the people who come for affirmation, but due to the way the social media networks are running at this point, we have this strange incentive to like combat each other and reduce the size of the space. So like even if we have the same shared goal, even if we have the same interests and the same motivations, we got there in different ways, then the algorithms are going to ensure that they profit off of us not aligning. Like everything is designed so that people of like mind find deviances, and instead of shared goals and construction. So that's how I see that, but I'm the subhuman. So like, it's easy just to dismiss anything I say as being invalid because of that, which is fine. I don't mind. Like, I find it very base thinking that goes on to be like funny at this point. I don't really like condemn it. I just kind of like find it kind of hysterical.
Okay. I also wanted to add something about fungibility,
Sure.
as Monero is fungible by default and by construction, and it's dynamic specifically to abide to this fundamental rule. Whereas Bitcoin, even if it becomes fungible from this moment, you still have the coins that were created before that have a history, they have a issuing date. And if you're an exchange and you want to discriminate between the coins that were created maybe before 2014 and after 2014, and say that everything before 2014 is maybe from Silk Road and cocaine and undesirable for them to accept as a mean of payment, they can do that. Even if Bitcoin becomes fungible, there's still this element which distinguishes between the coins according to the date when they were issued. So you cannot really
Yeah.
say.
No, you kind of get it. I mean, this is why I think that the Bitcoin Foundation is the true Bitcoin, by the way, because provenance is real in Bitcoin. So if provenance is real, if that's measurable, then the risk for your UTXO is real, meaning every UTXO has a different redemption risk. And so then you have to ask yourself, like, okay, which UTXOs are the most likely to be redeemable? Those will have the greater value. And which you'll probably conclude, if you allow yourself to like deviate from the herd, is that any UTXOs created by vendor extensions or vendor extended Bitcoin clients would have a greater risk than any Bitcoin UTXO created by a standard Bitcoin or standards compliant Bitcoin. And so, yeah, and then you can go into the provenance of your UTXOs from there and ascribe risk. And yeah, I don't know. Like nobody really knows what the answers are to some of these questions, but you get that there's a nuance there, which as soon as you do that, you're acting in an immoral capacity with the Bitcoin maximalist ethos, which is I think is like very detrimental to community health, but also funny. So whatever, I'll take it.
I have a strange feeling that after I publish this interview, I'm going to get blocked by some people.
Yeah, of course you will. Because the social distance to it, like to deviant, is too close. I mean, this is how tribalism works. You are now contaminated. You are of, the social distance was proximate, and so now you're contaminated, and so they have to block you so that they don't catch the same contamination. Which, like Socrates kind of knew that contamination is reason, generally, and that's why he was put to death in many ways, is because he brought that, and it was immoral. Like it just is. It's very obvious. But then you have like these very, very, very difficult questions. That now your life, if you believe that, now your life gets even more difficult because you really are up against a bigger problem, I'd say. So I don't have any shame of this.
I have one last question for you.
Sure.
As this has been going for a long time. And since you dismissed maximalism and you tore it down to the origins, do you find any projects that are legit outside of Bitcoin and Monero?
Yeah, well, I mean, Decred is the largest Bitcoin team, which is so funny to me because it's another, you can't talk about it, but like particularly with Blockstream having pivoted to like this sort of multi-blockchain world, and maybe some people left and such. The Decred project is phenomenally interesting. They have been around for a long time. They've been writing Bitcoin code for a long time. They've written some of the best Bitcoin code. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And they have like 30 or 40 full-time devs writing Bitcoin. And like, yeah, they also write Decred, but Decred is just kind of Bitcoin too. So if you haven't looked into Decred, I'd have no idea if it's useful. I have no idea if it's a good investment. I don't really care. It's just the biggest Bitcoin project. It's just very obvious and it's very funny and I think good. So you can look into them. They're great. From the product side, like the thing that everybody wants to buy, maybe not the maximalists, but they do, even though they don't know this. They want to buy an index. They want to buy an index of the top 10 performing coins. I see this constantly. People want to just put some money in on like a regular basis, like $100 a month or something, into an index fund that auto balances and does this thing. Shrimpy.io is as close as you'll get to that now. And we can have a discussion on the limitations of that platform, but if you haven't used it yet, I love what they're doing. They don't pay me I don't receive anything from them. I've met them. They're just nice people. And the product is good. And it's nice because they don't hold any of the funds themselves. So now I think that we need to see better hardware integration on their side. They do support hardware wallets, but I think like a hardware wallet company needs to step up maybe and increase some of the security on these products. But we're not there yet. But Shrimpy is great. And the proposition is kind of obvious. I do think indexing will outperform active management in this space over time. And I think there's even some preliminary evidence now to suggest that that is true. And what else is interesting to me? I like what the Gab guys are doing. I don't know that it's that's a very complex project. I don't know that it's going to succeed or not, but I like it. I want them to succeed, I think. And I think those are some of the big ones. There's a few others that I could probably pull together, but hardware wallet type things, payment processing type things are good. And it's a little damning that there's a handful of things that we should have had by now. We haven't, like we really don't have a good replacement for Reddit or Twitter. We should have had something like that by now. We don't have a good replacement for Patreon. There's some good stuff out there, but people don't use it, so that's kind of a problem. And we don't have a decentralized YouTube yet. It would be nice to have something like that. And we'll probably get there, but we'll see. How long it takes and when. I don't know.
Well, you just gave me this idea, and it's not going to take long. How about I tell you the projects which are above Monero in terms of market cap, and you characterize them in one phrase and say what you think about them? So I know what you think about Bitcoin because we have talked about it for quite some time. So the second one is Ethereum.
I'm not crazy about Ethereum. I think smart contracts are very dubious, but the faith that people have in this project is non-trivial. So it's very possible that it could completely moon. You should have that in your basket. It pains me to say, but there's the potential to perform there.
Okay, XRP.
I don't understand XRP. I've never understood XRP. I don't know why it's legal. I don't know why people buy it, other than the main selling point seems to be that every token is under $1. So that you're kind of betting on like the regulatory space there, which probably isn't a bad bet. And I guess like the human psychology of wanting numbers under $1, I have no idea if that's a good bet or not. I'm guessing that one's not. I don't think I would put Ripple in my basket, I have to confess, even though I would probably recommend everybody else does.
Okay. EOS. Or EOS or whatever.
I liked what I saw there. Here's the thing you got to consider is if there's no censorship in the Bitcoin space, then EOS is an efficiency. And if they do it right, should be like to the moon successful. However, I do think that we will see regulations enforced. So you should put in your basket because, again, I think that it's kind of hard to really tell the market. Am I crazy about it? I could take it or leave it. Depends on the regulations. That's the thing.
Okay. Litecoin.
Litecoin is actually interesting because the casinos have seemingly picked it up. So they have retail adoption in a way that I think people are discounting, and that makes it promising. I think it's also a fine, check on maybe the Bitcoin blockchain. If there's something happened catastrophic to Bitcoin, it's highly conceivable that's Bitcoin 2.0. So yeah, some risk there is probably warranted, I'd say.
Bitcoin Cash.
I hold Bitcoin Cash. I hold old UTXOs. Yeah, put in your basket. Why not? You never know. It depends. I think Roger's kind of very dispirited lately, but I don't know. Throw it in there. Why not?
I'm not sure if Tether counts, but okay, it's a stable coin.
Okay, Tether, stay the fuck away from Tether, man. That's a time bomb. That's going to get us in trouble, and it's going to take a whole bunch of shit down with it, frankly. I'm a little bearish on the space, not because of anything other than Tether. So once the Tether risk is mitigated, then I think we're going to be on great footing. But until then, I think we aren't on great footing, and I do not recommend putting money in Tether.
Stellar.
This is West like Ripple. I don't understand. Like there's no cogent explanation to some of these products. And I'm identical to Ripple. Everything I said about Ripple applies to Stellar in full. In fact, I'm probably less inclined to like Ripple because Jed McCaleb runs it and he's got a trail of tears behind him in this space, and I don't know what to say else besides that.
Okay, Tron.
I don't get Tron. It could make you some money. I don't see any value to it.
Well, it's like a Chinese Ethereum that is a neo and makes greater promises due to a functioning marketing department.
That's the thing, though. I don't know the Chinese culture, right? So like, it could end up being that like there's more Chinese investors than there are us, American investors, and for all I know, there's some weird thing will happen and that'll pop. Like that's how investing works.
Okay, Binance Coin.
Yeah, these like proto securities weird me out. I would say no on that one.
It's in the top 10.
I know.
I have no idea how. Cardano.
I never got that project. It's, I guess, probably worth putting in the basket because there's been some diehards. Would I buy it? No, I don't think so.
Bitcoin SV.
I like SV. I really do. I don't know that there's any efficiency. I have no idea. I don't trust Craig Wright in any capacity, but I love what he's doing. I mean, he's successfully manifested this like kayfabing archetype that he's just the heel, and like he's taken almost a very Trumpian approach to things in that he's sort of like the sort of hyperbole and the bluster have like outpaced the criticism, because the criticism, how do you criticize something that's absurd? That this is like some new phenomenon in society. I just want to see what happens. So I'm gonna say yes on Bitcoin SV because I want that to work somehow. I think that'd be great. It'd just be fucking Bitcoin weird.
Oh, you must watch pro wrestling. You use the kayfabe terminology.
No, I don't. I grew up. My grandfather watched a lot of wrestling as a kid, so I grew up watching it, and I don't watch it now. But I'm aware of the format, and I don't know what else to say about it. But yeah, I mean, there's kayfabings everywhere in this space, and in the national space as well. It's the new way we communicate. Like WWE was way ahead of its time, apparently.
Okay, then there's Monero, but you spoke about it, I guess.
Yeah, don't buy Monero. It's a scam. Absolutely not worth your time, money, or effort, and stay away from it. Yes, that's an easy one.
It makes you a subhuman.
It makes you subhuman.
IOTA.
Oh God, this project, man. Stay away from IOTA. It's just fucking weird, that project. Good moon, but it's fucking weird. I don't know what to tell you about IOTA. It makes no sense. It's a plagiarized white paper, right? And then like this Internet of Things. I mean, like, you got to consider that like there's no, you're betting on a meme. So I don't know if that meme would pamp. Like, you have to find a group of greater fools. So like the question isn't whether or not the product works, because it doesn't work. The question is, are people dumb enough to buy it? And that might be yes, actually. That might be yes. So you might want it, but I'm going to say no, because I just don't know. I'm going to say no.
Okay. Surprisingly, Dash is above Zcash, but okay, Dash.
Yeah, I've never understood Dash. I lost like a ridiculous. I made money on it. I sold it when they rebranded from Darkcoin to Dash. Like in the end of things, if I kept it on, I would have had so much more fucking money. So I have like this weird emotional like thing going on with Dash. I don't know. They've got, you know what I will say? They've got, I'll definitely put it in your basket. They've got traction in Venezuela, and you can't take that away from them. And they have at least one fighter jet, maybe two. So like I can't argue with that. It's just evidence-based, observation-based success. So I would say, yeah, you probably need to hold some Dash in your basket.
The 16th one is Maker.
I've met Maker people. I don't get these Maker's the stable coin pitch, right, on Ethereum, and it's got like 2% of the supply in there now. Is that right?
I see that the price is 646 and Ethereum is 146. So that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. In any case, I don't know. I don't really get that project. I don't know how you make money on a stable coin. It's a stable coin, right?
Apparently.
Yeah. I don't know how you make money on a stable coin. Like that, just the math seems really simple. Like, if a stable coin is going to last, you have to have an equal amount of money going in and out, I guess. Like, you'd think, like, that's how deposits generally work, unless you want to be fractional. And here it's like, well, they're going to do that, and they're also going to make you a bunch of money. So that money has to come from somewhere. There's more sophisticated ways of looking at it, to be clear, but like in this very least sophisticated way, it doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
The next one is Neo.
Yeah, I have no feelings on Neo. It's it's improbable to succeed.
Ethereum Classic.
I like Ethereum Classic. I want that to work. I don't know if it will. It proves that like, in my mind, consensus. The thing I like about Ethereum Classic is it proves that consensus is made out of carbon and not silicon. Meaning, for as much as like the rhetoric would have you, believe that like the code is what's in the silicon, it's the code, but like Ethereum Classic, I think proves that that's not true. So I wanted to stay around. Will you make money on it? I don't know, probably not.
Okay, NEM.
I can't believe that's still around after all this time. The problem I have with like some of these like old time like Litecoin, although less so Litecoin obviously, but like with NEM definitely is that like the curves on these things are general like 90% of the time an instant like pump and then followed by despair. And NEM's in that despair mode, I'm pretty sure, and should always be, because like the issue, like once you've got that major lump out, like that inventory just sits there until like people lose faith. So I would not, I'm not really not enthusiastic about NEM.
What about Zcash?
Like I don't love Zcash for like a bunch of like reasons. They had this major security issue recently that I think is like very pessimistic, but I think it's like an effort of like just being reasonable. If you're going to have any fungibility risk, you should definitely have a couple of fungible blockchains in your basket. So I would probably suggest that you have some Zcash in your basket. I wouldn't suggest a lot, but I would put that in there.
Yeah, I remember I spoke to Fluffy Pony, and he told me that in the case of privacy coins, sometimes it's about the lives of people in authoritarian regimes who buy into the marketing and they believe that it's truly private. And sometimes people who use Zcash don't know how to use the confidential transactions and use the normal ones and think that by default it's private. And
it also has very reduced liquidity. Yeah. Yeah, like because it's not privacy by default, like the mixer health is poor and the redemption possibilities are inferior, theoretically.
Okay, I think I have two more projects that I want to ask you about. One is Tezos.
Yeah, Tezos, Tezos is, I would say, probably the same things I said about Tezos for EOS. I think that the smart contract proposition is almost completely just dubious, and like on chain governance, it's not how governance works. It's necessarily off chain. Like say for maybe some like voting features, I guess, but yeah, I've yet to hear a very like cogent need for smart contracts in general, and there isn't a lot of inertia there. I would probably lean towards EOS over Tezos, especially given like just the rocky start they've had. It's amazing. You give people like hundreds of millions of dollars. The least they could do is like keep the money and build a product. And seemingly they get dragged in before anything even opens. It's just like very pessimistic outcome, if you ask me.
No. What about Dogecoin? I wanted to end with this one.
Dogecoin?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I can't, like, I don't know what it's good for other than laughs, I guess. It answered a good question at the time. And I actually think it's probably one of the most relevant projects in the space for the time. Now, do we need it? I don't think so. And I can't imagine you really making any money with it. The whole thing is bizarre. But I like the project. So I don't think that it's a good buy, but I like that it exists. I certainly love that it existed. And to the degree that it exists now, I like it. But should you own any? Probably not.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris DeRose. This was
a
very insightful interview, and there's a lot to process from the bits of information that we received. Hope we'll do this again some other time.
Anytime you'd like. This was wonderful.